How do you react when life throws you a surprise that stops you in your tracks? Most of us try to avoid these moments at all costs, but today's guest argues that these interruptions are actually the best ground for new ideas and progress. Patrick Leddin is a true leader in the area of disruption and a high-level negotiation expert. He's a professor at Vanderbilt University, a former captain in the U.S. Army, and the co-author of the New York Times bestselling book, Disrupt Everything, and that was written alongside the world-famous author, James Patterson. In this episode, Patrick explains why staying with the status quo is a trap and how you can develop the habits of a positive disruptor. We explore the powerful link between disruption and negotiation, the life-changing impact of making small changes about our personal relationships, and Patrick's incredible story about how he negotiated a partnership with the world's most popular author, James Patterson. If you want to learn how to turn life's unexpected twists into your greatest opportunities, this conversation is for you. Let's jump in. This episode is brought to you by Granola, Shopify, and Fabric by Gerber Life. If meetings are eating up your day and you want clean, structured notes without the stress, try Granola AI totally free for 3 months at granola.ai/Kwame. Ready to turn your what-ifs into a real business? Sign up for your $1 per month trial with Shopify at shopify.com/Kwame. And finally, for the parents listening, protect your family's financial future in just minutes. Apply for term life insurance today at meetfabric.com/Kwame. Policies issued by Western Southern Life Assurance Company, not available in certain states. Prices subject to underwriting and health questions. Well, you have a very, very unique background because I can't think of anybody else who's truly a thought leader in disruption. I'm sure you probably are more familiar with the space than me, but I think it's a unique nexus between disruption and also high-level negotiation expertise. Because of course, when we get to the book, we're going to talk about disrupt everything, but I want to highlight the point that you have this unique background between the nexus between disruption and negotiation. I want to get your idea on how that impacts your perspective as a professional.
Well, I think that negotiation, as far as that goes, I've done some pretty good negotiations in my life. I've screwed some up, and significantly. I taught it for 10 or 11 years at Vanderbilt, so I kind of know the theory behind it and the approaches behind it, which has been good to know. And I think it's a skill that people need to work on in negotiating. But I think a lot of negotiation has to deal with taking someone else's perspective, understanding their situation, kind of thinking through their interests, looking at alternatives, all of those typical things that go into negotiation approaches. And in many ways, disruption I see is very similar in that both can help you advance, both the negotiations and disruptions can help you advance toward a better life, a better team, a better experience, a better outcome, if you're willing in both cases to embrace it. I mean, in many ways, a negotiation, I would tell my students, is just a conversation, and you have conversations all day long. So it's a conversation. And in many ways, disruptive moments are just things that hit us all the time, but you just have to choose to engage in that dance as well.
Yes. Oh, this is great because what I've recognized in life and of course in negotiation and difficult conversations, there is the combination of mindset and skill set. You can have all the skills in the world. If you have the wrong mindset, it doesn't work. And so you need both of them. And I'd be interested to see from your perspective when it comes to disruption, first of all, how are you defining it? And then second of all, what are the mindset traps that hold people back from actually utilizing it and leaning into it?
No, I so agree with you. The idea that mindset and behaviors are so critical. I mean, if you don't like your results that you're getting, take a look at your behaviors. If I'm not moving the scale in the way I want or looking more fit or whatever it might be, look at what I do when I get to the gym, if I even go there, that type of thing. Like our behaviors deliver results. And if I don't like my behaviors, take a look at my mindset. It's oftentimes how I see the world that causes me to behave in certain ways. So when it comes to disruption, we feel it very similarly. In fact, the two first steps in the process we teach is discernment, which is really about stepping back and thinking about what should you take on. The second one is behaving, which is about leaning into your disruptive strengths. But how we define disruption, to answer your question more specifically, is we operationalize it pretty broadly. So we're talking about a disruption. It could be something that happens to you, which, by the way, we all are disrupted. We all are the disrupted in life. But it's also something you can start, you can cause to happen. I would say that we're all the disruptive, but we're not all disruptors. It can be small, it can be large, it can be unique to you, It can be ubiquitous. It can be like you go to the doctor and you get the result of a test. It's unique to you, or it can be COVID-19, which is ubiquitous. It can be at face value. Most people would say a really good thing, like a new project opportunity, or at face value, something that people consider pretty daunting or scary or concerning. At the end of the day, a disruption is something that stops you in your tracks. It causes you to pause and makes you realize there might be an opportunity for something new and different to happen. And
Mm.
when we think about the mindset around it, there's a limiting mindset that comes around disruption, which is, hey, disruption breaks things. I got everything just the way I wanted. And then you come along and you tell me the customer wants something different, or there's a new piece of technology that upends everything, or a team member leaves, or my boss leaves, or we're reorganizing, or whatever it might be. It blows things up, which is one perspective to take, but it's kind of limiting because if you take that mindset on, then what tends to happen is you try to avoid disruption. You're trying to create boundaries so nothing gets messed up. You cling on to things even when they, are no longer serving you well. As opposed to a different mindset, an effective mindset might be, hey, disruption is fertile ground for innovation and progress, for something new
Mm.
and something different. And I find that even if you're dealing with some really tragic things, we write about things in the book that you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy. Some of these stories, I mean, it's terrible things that happen. But even in those moments, yeah, they might want to go back to the way things were before the accident or before the incident or whatever it might be, but they know they can't. So they say, okay, what can I do now?
Oh, this is so good, Patrick, because it makes me wonder when we think about the mindset that's required to turn these disruptions into opportunities for growth and advancement. Depending on what type of disruption it is, it might almost feel emotionally inappropriate to try to look to the positive. And so, for instance, something horrible happens. You might lose a loved one or have an injury, something like that. It almost feels like it is disrespectful to the gravity of the moment to try to figure out how you can move forward from it. And so, I have this concept, I call it obligatory emotions, where we say, based on the circumstances, someone in my position should feel this way. And then we feel as though that's the role that we should play. So we kind of get stuck. So how can we get somebody out of that feeling of obligatory emotions and give themselves permission to look to the positive, even in really tough situations?
I love that question. A couple of thoughts I have on it. One is the emotions are real and they're unique to you. And I would suggest that I can't tell someone how to react to any particular disruption. We're all going to embrace it differently. And oftentimes we have different layers of emotion. You might be excited, but also fearful. You might be anxious and a little, who knows what, you could be all sorts of things. There's kind of the primary and secondary. And what I encourage people to do is process through that a little bit, spend some time letting that be whatever it is, and then choosing from there. As far as I like that idea of there's an expectation. Life is all about expectations others place upon us sometimes, right? The idea that you have the life you want to live, and then you have the life you expect everybody else wants you to live or expects you to live, and sometimes those run opposing to one another. There was a guy we studied in the research on it, and we wrote about him in the book. His name's Jamie Andrew, and Jamie Andrew is from Scotland. I first met him a number of years ago. I was getting ready to speak at an event, and unbeknownst to me, he was speaking there as well. And I had a chance to meet him and talk to him. But Jamie's story goes a little bit like this. He was hiking in the Alps with a friend of his. He was a mountain climber. He and his friend were pretty skilled mountain climbers, both named Jamie, by the way. And Jamie Andrew and Jamie Fisher set off to climb up to this high point in the Alps. And unbeknownst to them, a disruption happens. The weather pattern that was supposed to go a certain way changes. They get caught at the top of this mountain. As he described it, it was a razor's edge. We're able to carve out a little spot for ourselves to kind of hunker down. And they ended up spending 5 nights there. By the 5th night, Jamie Andrew was rescued. His partner, Jamie Fisher, passed away.
Hmm.
Jamie Andrew was taken off the mountain by helicopter. He woke up in the hospital. They woke him up and told him, we're going to have to amputate your hands and your feet. So imagine you come back out of that surgery now. Your friend has passed away and you've lost your hands and your feet. Now, somebody might say, how should Jamie react in that moment? What should he do? What would be the right emotion? As you might imagine, he's juggling a lot of emotions, but the one that was pretty critical to him, or a thought that was pretty critical to him, was, I need to live a life that would be respectful and a life that would show how much I valued my friend.
Hmm.
So in that moment, he chose to say, I'm not going to be, there's certain things I can't do right now. I've got to learn new things, but I'm going to live a life that's, that it really pays homage to my friend. And I like that idea in that moment that he chose a different path. Some people might say, you should live a life and do X, Y, Z. And he's like, no, I'm gonna choose my own life. What that meant to him in the beginning was he said, today somebody brushed my teeth. Tomorrow I'll brush my own teeth. And the next day I'll do something else. And the next day I do something else. So, I mean, there's certain people think, in that situation, how should Jamie have felt? At the end of the day, Jamie felt the way Jamie felt, but then he made a choice from there.
Oh, that's powerful. Thank you for telling the story. And also the key word that is resonating the most with me is choice. And just giving ourselves permission to, first of all, acknowledge and notice that we have a choice, and then make the best choice for us. Because at the end of the day, we're trying to write our own life story, and this is an opportunity to write a new chapter. And I actually mentioned this in my last podcast, but when it comes to these, just the storybook of our life, we obviously have a lot of control, but there's always a co-author called fate that will throw things in called disruptions and mix up the story. And it's our job to make the next chapter the best chapter that we can. And I actually want to zoom in on the word disruption too, because now I'm thinking there's a part of this that gives us semantic power, because the words that we use have meaning and they matter to us. Because if we have a situation, let's go back to the Jamie situation, that's bad luck. That is a tragedy. Those things, that's true. We can describe it in that way. But I think it's more empowering to say he experienced a disruption. And that's a different type of mindset, because based on what we've been talking about already, okay, a disruption is a change in this circumstance that gives you an opportunity to pause and then make a choice. And so just even the power of the word disruption allows us to replace other words that might have been less empowering in the same circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes like that particular story that we put in the book is obviously, as I said earlier, you wouldn't wish this on your worst, enemy type of thing. But oftentimes they don't come that way. They can come in small ways. There was one person we had a chance to interview, and I sat down and talked to him for a long time. Was an actor named Marlon Wayans. And people know Marlon Wayans from being in the show In Living Color with his siblings and being in the Wayans brothers. But he's one of 10 kids from New York City, 5 of which who work in the entertainment industry these days. And he was talking to me about when he was in his teenage years, he was on TV all the time on these different TV shows. And then as he started to hit around 20 or so, the phone started ringing a little bit less. And he said to his brother, Keenan Ivory Wayans, he said, why is the phone, not ringing as much? And his brother said, hey, if you want the phone to ring, you better learn to not just act, but to write, produce, direct. You got to be able to do it all. And in that situation, he didn't climb up in the mountain in the Alps. He had one quick conversation that many people may have just said, okay, good point, and they moved on. But for him, it stopped him in his tracks. So as you're writing your own story, as you talk about, or as we talk about in the book, as you're living out the fire inside you, no one could define what a good life looks like for you. You have to make that choice, and no one can say what is disruptive enough to make you stop and pivot and change. That's a choice you'll make along the way. So it's what causes you to slow down or pause or say, I'm going to think about that for a while. And it comes in all different shapes and forms.
Huh. This is fascinating, because essentially we have a lot of choice in this, and a lot of the choice has to come from the way that we see the world too, because a lot of people in that exact same situation could have just blown it off as a trivial conversation, not really taking anything meaningful from it. And there have been times in my life where I might have talked to a mentor or one of my parents, my mom or my dad, and I say, I remember when you told me this thing and it changed my life forever. They're like, I have no clue that I ever said that, but I'll take your word for it. And so
Yep.
I'm recognizing that in order to truly be a disruptor, and utilize this as opportunities, as opportunities for growth, you have to change the way that you see the world as well.
Yeah, you definitely have to. And you have to be clear on a few things. You have to be clear on, we call them in the book, these 4 fundamental facts. But you have to understand a few things about life. And it doesn't take but a few moments to kind of process them. But sometimes we don't sit and think about the things that are right in front of us. So one thing is this, the one fundamental fact is that the status quo, as we call it, is a deceptive little devil. If you like things the way they are, folks, as you're listening to this, enjoy the moment. they're going to change.
Yeah.
Things are constantly dynamic. You talk about negotiation, the best alternative to a negotiated agreement, your BATNA, it can be changing as well. So things are constantly changing. That's one thing about life. The second thing is that it's okay that things change or things get disrupted because you're wired to handle this. And what we mean by that is you have a big brain. You can create amazing ideas in your mind and begin to manifest them. You can regulate how you use your energy and your time. You have experiences in life that have wired you, that kind of knitted you in a certain way, times where you've gotten knocked down and you've gotten back up. And you also have resources around you, people who want to help you win, and resources you could put into play to help you use that wire for disruption, really strongly. The third one is that this relationship piece is really a big deal in life. Life's a team sport.
Yeah.
So the third one says relationships in life provide headwinds and tailwinds. And the idea is that you have some relationships in life that are pushing you along toward your better purpose and some that are holding you back. Some are the tailwind pushing you, some are the headwinds. And we want people to realize that sometimes that means I have to disrupt a relationship. One that's kind of gone sideways. I need to be bold enough to do something about it. And at the same time, realize, when am I a headwind or tailwind to somebody else? And then the fourth fundamental fact, which is the one that kind of keeps me going every day, and I know it does with James Patterson too, is your time here is finite. Let's make it count in ways that matter. And I asked Jim Patterson, I was like, why did you tackle this project? Right? I mean, the guy has sold, if people know anything about selling books, he has sold 475 million book copies, right? That's insane.
Wow.
Successful in so many different genres and with different, why would he tackle this project? And he said, because my time here is short. What can I do most beautifully? And he felt like this particular thing would be helpful. When he first came to my class at Vanderbilt, he came to my class that I was teaching called Leading Business Through Times of Crisis. And he started off with this question for the students: are you living a good life? And I was like, well, I didn't expect him to say that out the gate.
Wow.
He said, are you living a good life, or do you feel like you're on one treadmill only to get on another treadmill, another one after that, and maybe 3, 4, 5 the rest of your life playing out? And then he said, I'm living a good life. Let me share with you how I did it. And he started telling his story. And as he was doing, I was probably taking a bit more notes than anybody else in the room. And I was like, I want to study this. I want to study how people take the twists and turns in life and then turn them into something that maybe nobody saw coming.
That's powerful.
Yeah.
That's powerful. And I think, again, there's a record scratch moment that would probably happen for the folks in the class. Like you said, you weren't expecting him to go in that direction. But at the end of the day, is that not the goal for everybody? We want to live a good life, and it's up to us to determine what that means for us. And so, Patrick, I want to flip this on you. What does it mean to you to live a good life?
Well, I spent a lot of time thinking about my purpose a number of years ago, and I'm glad I did. It took me a while to think about it. And there's many things that are important to me in life and I value in life. My family, I've been married almost 35 years. I've got 2 kids. They're both adults. They're both married. I have 2 grandkids. I have 2 dogs. I got 2, a lot of things. But a lot of those things, they matter to me so much. And I think that ultimately, when I think about like, what am I here on earth to do? I wrote down probably 15 years ago now, and I've just leaned into it, that I think my purpose here in life is to provide ideas and insights that help other people live their great purpose.
Mm.
And that's one of the reasons I took a job at the university, because I thought, okay, this is really at this inflection point in people's lives where maybe you don't know you're saying anything, like you were saying earlier, you don't know you're saying anything that would stick with anybody, but it does. And then when this project came along, I thought, wow, I could take these ideas and study these people, learn from it, and provide insights and ideas to help other people live their great life. Because ultimately the premise is, if you want to live a good life, you've got to A, define what that means to you, and then B, make it happen in the face of the curveballs life is going to throw at you.
Right.
And we spend one chapter talking about define it, because there's lots of people who talk about defining it and lots of good books out there and things you can study to define it. We spend 32 chapters or so talking about how to live it.
Oh, it's powerful. I love this. And a big part of this, obviously, is going to be relationships, like you mentioned before. And when let's think about this from a couple of different ways before we get into like the negotiation stuff. Since I have a negotiation professor here, I want to talk a little bit about that at some point. But I want us to think about what a good life means as it relates to our relationships. Because when you look at all the studies, like the Harvard longevity study, you can tell that the quality of our lives are often determined by the quality of our relationships. And like you said, we have some tailwinds and headwinds when it comes to these relationships. How can we help people to identify the biggest challenges that they have in their relationships, and then the conversations they need to have in order to improve them?
Well, I think one thing we have in the book, and you don't have to buy the book to do it, but just to basically think about the different relationships you have in your life, and then kind of think neutral. Are they neutral? Are they headwinds, like kind of 0 to 5? Are they tailwinds 0 to 5? Just to get a feel for how they're pushing you, and then what are you doing to them? Just kind of get a lay of the land, but also to think about the idea that, what's the purpose of these relationships? Is it for you to extract as much value as you can out of them, and for them to get you to do everything, for use them to get everything you want in life? But no. Is it the opposite of that? No, that's martyrdom. It's not that. It's the idea that going on these journeys together is more fruitful and beneficial by doing it together. Years ago, my son, when he was about 19 or 20, he actually, back up a little bit further than that. When he was in his middle school to high school years, I had this desire with my kids to basically say yes to everything that they asked me to go do with them. It didn't mean I would do everything, but I would at least explore it, and that would cause me to do all sorts of, things that they wanted to go try. I'd go do it with them. And he wanted to take some friends hiking. And my son is the type of kid that if two friends are good, 10 are better. He's just got that kind of personality. So all of a sudden, it went from me and one of his friends for an overnight hiking trip to me and 8 of his friends for 10 days on the Appalachian Trail. That type of thing.
Wow.
And yeah, and then we kept hiking after that. We hiked together a lot. And we ended up we hiked Mount Kilimanjaro together. And I remember when we were hiking that mountain, we were every day you get in the tent with your guides and you talk about what happened that day, what's going to happen tomorrow. And at one point, I kept asking things like to the guide, "How far are we going to go tomorrow? What's the elevation change? Blah blah blah. What should I wear? What's the weather going to be?" And after 3 days into this, he said, "Would you please just enjoy the journey?" And I was like, all right, indicted. Right. And I mean, think about it. It's a unique experience where you're hiking up this mountain. It's kind of once in a lifetime with your son while he has the time to do it and you have the time to do it. And you're worried about how much elevation we're going to tackle tomorrow. Just enjoy the moment. And I think that's what we need to think about with these relationships in life. They're not just a means to an end, they are the journey unto themselves in so many ways. So I think about my relationship with my wife, and we've had our ups and downs. We've been at the edge before of it not going forward, much of which I own, and I had to work my way through it. And I think about team members in the past, some that I think about that I had such a great relationship and I think so fondly about. And I think about ones where we struggled, and I think, gosh, what did I bring to the table that caused that to happen? Is there a way to reconcile it or not bring that forward into other relationships? So it's just, it to me, it's just always kind of thinking about the relationships in that way. And I encourage people to do it. And I'm not a overly soft and fuzzy type of guy. I'm just not. But I recognize that my best times in life have been around other people.
Wow. I love that quote, "Life is a team sport." It's so true.
Yeah.
And thank you for sharing those stories. And the things that come out the most to me is the fact that the people that are closest to you are the people who are most important to you. You talked about your wife, you talked about your son, right? And you talked about the people on your team that you care about. And that's something that we have to remember, because we can often invest so much in our professional lives that we forget that the people who are the most important to us are our family and our friends and things like that. And as you were giving the answer and you were saying, well, let's start off with a list of our relationships and then categorize them positive, negative, and neutral. I started to feel that nervousness in my stomach, because it forces you to evaluate the status quo. Because once you start to categorize people, the I don't think it's gonna be hard for us to do that. I think we could very instantly say, "Okay, yeah, positive, negative, neutral, okay." But then when we say negative, now we have a decision to make,
You gotta do something with it, yeah.
right?
Actually, years ago, I had a personal experience, and this is interesting, I think, perhaps to people who are listening, because I was, one thing that Patterson and I talked about is as we were writing and researching, he also would encourage me to go out and talk. Just talk about the topic, talk about, because oftentimes, as you probably know, just saying something, sometimes it comes out in a way that clicks with people,
Yeah.
and you're like, "Okay, I should write it that way." That's how it clicks. So in the process of going out and talking with people, I was talking about relationships, and I just happened to tell this one story, which is the only personal story of mine that's in this book. Everything else is the people we researched, and because Jim was like, "Put it in the book." And what it was I years ago I was in a kind of a workshop, and the facilitator was up front, and they were talking about life and the relationships we have in life. And she said, you probably have like 20 or 30 different roles you fill in life. You might be a friend or a father or a colleague or a project leader, or, this, that, and the other. And I was like, initially, I was like, I don't have that many. And then I started writing it down. I'm like, gosh, I have 20, 30 different roles. And she said, pick the 4 or 5 or 6 you think are like the most important right now in life. So I'm looking through this list, and one role I wrote down on the list of as I was giving all my roles, one was son, S-O-N. Now I'm a son. And I circled it. I don't know what caused me to circle, but I circled it. And she said, okay, now assess those 4 or 5 or 6 roles. How are you doing? And as I did that, I was like,
We've all been there. It's late at night, and you finally find that one product that you've been waiting for, but then you realize that your credit card is in the other room. That's when that iconic Shop Pay button becomes your best friend. It has all of your information saved, making checkout as simple as a tap of your screen. Shopify powers 10% of all e-commerce in the US. They help you to accelerate your efficiency with AI tools and give you world-class expertise in processing returns and managing inventory. Because of features like Shop Pay, Shopify has the best converting checkout on the planet, which means fewer abandoned carts and more sales for you. See fewer carts go abandoned and more sales go through with Shopify and their Shop Pay button. Sign up for your $1 per month trial today at shopify.com/Kwame. Go to shopify.com/Kwame. That is shopify.com/Kwame. Today, I want to talk about something that a lot of us put off, and that's life insurance. Now, I get it. It sounds like it's a big undertaking, but if you have family or loved ones who depend on your income, a term life policy is an important step that you can take today to protect their financial future. Fabric by Gerber Life is term life insurance that you can get done today. It's made for busy parents. It's all online and on your schedule. You could be covered in under 10 minutes, often with no health exam required. If you have kids, the time to lock in low rates is now. Fabric has flexible, high-quality policies that fit your budget, like $1 million in coverage for less than $1 per day. And there's no risk because they offer a 30-day money-back guarantee, and they are trusted by millions of families. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to protect their family. Apply today in just minutes at meetfabric.com/Kwame. That's meetfabric.com/Kwame. Use my link so they know that I sent you. That's MEET fabric.com/Kwame. Policies issued by Western Southern Life Assurance Company, not available in certain states. Prices subject to underwriting and health questions.
I'm not too great as a son. I mean, I'm not bad. My parents wouldn't have come in a room and be like, this kid's a nightmare. And I was like almost 35, 40 years old. They wouldn't have said that, but they also wouldn't be like, he's the best in the world. My mom probably would have, but he's the best in the world. He's like in the middle. And what it was at the time I lived in Louisville, Kentucky. My parents lived in Chicago. I grew up on the south side of Chicago. That's where they lived at. And our relationship was, I'm embarrassed to say, but it was kind of a sense of obligation to me. I would call home, once a weekend, and once a week I would call home on the weekend and just check in. And it was literally like, what's the weather like? What's the traffic like? What's on your to-do list this week? We'd exchange lists like that, and then we'd hang up. And I kind of probably mentally like check it off the list. And it was like, okay. And after I was indicted when I saw it on the list that day. I'm not doing too well with it. I want to do better. So I just did some little things. Like I would call my parents up. They raised 5 kids. I'm the youngest of 5, and they did a pretty good job. We're all doing all right. So I thought I'd write questions that I could ask them. And then about raising kids or what's going on with my kids, that type of thing. And I would send them postcards when I travel for work, stuff like that. And a couple of years passed by, and I felt pretty good about what I was doing. And then I was on this business trip where I was traveling through Dallas, changing flights in Dallas. I landed in Dallas. I turned my phone on, and there's a text message from one of my brothers. He says, give me a call. So I pick up my phone. I call my brother, and he says, hey, you need to come home and see mom. My mom had been sick. He said, you need to come home and see mom. She's not doing well. I said, okay, let me do this business trip I'm on. I'll fly back to Louisville. My wife and I will drive up, find somebody to watch the kids. We'll drive up really quickly and see mom. And he said, no, you need to come home right now. So I got back on the plane that I just got off of. It was going back to Louisville, grabbed my wife. We drove up to Chicago, and it was December, dead of winter. And we get to my parents' house, and my mom she rallies. You ever hear somebody's like the last person you're waiting to see? I was the 5th kid. She was waiting for me to show up. She rallies. We spent a couple hours together, and then she passes away. And I remember after all this was over with the funeral and the visitation and all that, we're sitting back at my dad's house. It's now my dad's house because mom has passed away. And I said to my wife, I said, I am so glad that I decided to try to be a better son, shifted my mindset and then my behaviors. And she said, you're still a son. and across the room's my dad. And my dad is, if my mom was the yes person in my life, my dad was my no person.
Yeah.
You know, if I wanted to go to somebody's house or go buy something, I'd ask mom. I wouldn't ask dad. And I'm like, dang, she's right. So I walk across the room and I said to my dad, I said, hey, dad, I travel a lot for work. Do you ever want to come with me? Fully expecting him to say no. And he was like, where are you going? And I go, I look at my phone. I'm like, I'm going to Topeka, Kansas. So my dad goes to Topeka, Kansas, and my dad goes to Florida. My dad, and all it just changed the nature of our relationship. I didn't have the language at the time to say, I'm going to disrupt this relationship, but that's what I did. He's 90, he'll be 95 in July. And,
Mhm.
you know, guess what? He wasn't the no guy I thought he was. He was just a guy with like 3 jobs, raising 5 kids on the south side of Chicago. He had a lot going on. And I just dealt with, and he saw me differently too. So the point being is that in that moment, I disrupted that relationship. And that's one thing that's, as I've gone out and talked about the book and worked with folks, even, you know, corporate clients, executive teams, they'll come up and say, I just text my brother or I just did whatever. And I think that matters too.
Thank you again for sharing that story. My goodness, this is this hitting the heartstrings today, and it's well, I think with everything that you've told us in that story, the thing that resonates the most to me is that the things that you were doing were not that big in terms of how difficult it was to accomplish the task. You just needed to do it because you
Mhm.
might have done you climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. That's probably harder than just writing a letter, but
Yeah, you
you
know, years ago, I went to U.S. Army Ranger. I went to Ranger School in
yeah.
the Army and did that stuff, and jumped out of planes for a bunch of years in the Army. And that's a lot harder than writing my mom a postcard. But for whatever reason, I did one, not the other. So,
Yeah, and it's the disruption doesn't need to be big.
mm-mm.
To have a massive impact on your life and the lives of others. And it's kind of one of those fork in the road types of moments. And the
Yep.
more we can start to recognize those forks in the road, the more we can start to take advantage of these opportunities to connect on a deeper level. And I'd be interested to explore with you with the relationship that you had with your father, those conversations, because it's sounding like, and I could be completely off, this situation, which was tragic, losing your mother, gave you the opportunity to connect with your father on a deeper level. And I'm assuming that now that you're spending time solo together, you're having conversations with a level of depth that you've never had before.
Yeah, it's so true. It's funny when I first started taking my business trips. When you This so between the time I came out of the military in my late, like, 29 years old, I went to work at a firm called KPMG Consulting, and then I owned a consulting firm with my wife for about 11 years. We sold it back when I was in my early 40s, and, I did a lot of traveling during that period of time, and this is right around the time my mom passed away, and, so if you travel a lot, you kinda get some perks, right? You get a
Mhm.
better seat on the airplane, you get a better hotel room, you can go into the lounge or whatever, stuff that you just kinda you appreciate, but it's not the reason you're going on the road.
Right.
And, but it was interesting with my dad to like share a hotel room with him and, you know, go on flights with him or go to the lounge with him. And he'll be like, I didn't even know this room existed in these hotels, you know, so that was those type of things. But there was also as I went out and, took him with me, or even to this day, when he reads something I've written or something, he likes to tell me about the work that he did. And I didn't really know much about the work he did. I mentioned earlier he had a couple jobs. He was usually like bartending on the weekends and things like that. But his main job was he installed phones for 36 years for Illinois Bell.
Oh.
And he would, you know, get up when the phone lines go down in the middle of the night and the storms come through and do all that type of stuff. And he just kind of left that outside the door of the house. He'd come home and, yep, now I'm home, and, work is out there, and I didn't really know that much about his work, but over the years, he's opened up more and more and he'll tell me stories, and it's kind of interesting to kind of watch him be a little nostalgic about, his experiences, and quite frankly, his experiences with leaders and teams isn't much different than what I've experienced with leaders and teams.
That's fascinating. And for the listeners who are not familiar with Chicago weather, when the phone lines go down and it is winter, I could not imagine. Could not
Yeah,
imagine.
this is pre-cell phone, right? So this was like for him doing the phone work, the phones were the big deal back then, yeah.
Yes. And this also gives us an opportunity to recognize that, and maybe I'm getting too meta with the idea of disruption, but we have to disrupt our own thinking about people because it sounds like there were some preconceived notions that you had about your father that changed, even though you were around him for almost half a century at that point.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we have to recognize when it comes to communication and relationships is that no matter how well you know somebody, you can never fully know them. And so we can and should stay endlessly curious about the people that are around us. And so I'd like to explore your perspective on the concepts of curiosity and humility as it relates to disruption.
Well, I think those are great questions. I think that in the book we talk about through the research we found 16 behaviors of positive disruptors, and I'll be honest with you, I was kind of disappointed. I've been talking about this recently. I'm like, I'm kind of disappointed. I wish there was like one behavior. Like, if you do this one, you got it nailed. The beautiful thing though is nobody we studied had all the behaviors.
Oh,
And like they had some, but not others. They were strong in certain things. They would surround themselves with other people who brought some different value, not values, but value to the table. And the first one is, I think, aligns with curiosity. The first behavior we identified in the list, as we list them, is called people who think deeply in order to gain insight. And what we found is that some of us, many of us, myself certainly at times, we kind of sleepwalk through life. And you know you're doing it if you drive through the light and you're like, gosh, was that last light green, red, or yellow? I don't know. I just went through it, right? We kind of do that sometimes in life. We just go through the rhythm, the typical habits, and there's a reason we do that. Our brains like consistency. They like ritual. They like running on autopilot. It conserves energy. And historically, there weren't buffet tables. Yet people had to go out and find their food, and getting calories was tough. So our brains like that. But there's some people that kind of pay attention differently than other people. They're like, wonder why that's that way, or why have three customers asked me for this, or why have I heard about that same piece of technology, or why. And the reason they're doing that it's that curiosity where they're trying to figure out what's going on here. And they look for what we call insights. I mean, it's not, we didn't coin the term, obviously, insights, but an insight is something that's few people know and it's valuable. If everybody knows it, it's not an insight because everybody knows it. If only you know it, but it's not valuable, like what's Patrick Leddin's favorite movie, that's not an insight. But if you can figure out something that is valuable that few people know, and some of these people pay the price, and it comes from curiosity. It comes from the ability to ask another question, to go a little bit deeper, to pay attention to what's going on, and say, okay, what's the pattern here? What's unfolding here? That's what we tried to do in the research too. What's the pattern? What's unfolding? What do people do in these moments of disruption?
how much of that is natural and how much of that can be learned?
I don't know the specific ratio, but there's or percentages, but I imagine some people are more inclined to, when you look at the behaviors, some people are more inclined to stand firm in the face of doubters. Some people are more inclined to listen to better understand. Some people are more inclined to have a genuine concern about others around them. Some people, these are the different ones. But I think that in many cases, you may have an inclination to do certain things. And I want to encourage people to lean into their strengths. But at the other hand, you probably can enhance those, and there are skills you can work on. So what we try to tell people to do is, hey, there's 16 of these things. There's no perfect set or pattern. We saw all different kinds of variations. I was hoping it would be like 1, 3, and 8 or something, but it's not that way. But what we have found is that there's these 16 behaviors, and people who lean into these strengths can do some amazing things. So I think the point would be is instead of focusing on kind of what do I need to get better at, it's just focus on what do I naturally tend to do well, or if people see it in me, and then how do I surround myself with other people who can round it out at times. So what great teams are complementary, where you take the weaknesses of one person and make it irrelevant by the strength of another. So let's just try to do that when it comes to making advances in the face of disruption.
Brilliant, brilliant. And I told you I was going to come back to negotiation,
Yeah, let's bring it on.
and so
Yeah.
let's do this because I want to think about it from the perspective of what we do in a negotiation when we have to go off script, when we encounter a disruption in the negotiation. And you're the perfect person to talk to about this. So I want to get your perspective just in terms let's start off with preparation and then recognizing that sometimes no matter how well we prepare, there will be surprises, there will be these disruptions. Let's talk about what do we do when that happens in our negotiations.
Well, everybody's got a plan, right, till they get punched in the face, isn't that the game plan? They gotta get punched in the face. Yeah, I mean, that's true. I think that there's some things that there's probably nothing more valuable in negotiation, or sizable portion of the value of negotiation happens before you ever sit down in the conversation, right? So preparation is really key. And whether you're using like the 7-element type of prepping or whatever you're using to prepare for the negotiation, I think it's really important to think through your interests and their interests, your other choices or things you can do and what their other choices, where you may have overlap, the relationship and what you want to make sure that you maintain or build in the relationship through the negotiation. Um, Understanding these things is really critical, and it takes a lot of time to do it well, I think. You get better at it over time, but it takes time to do it well. The nice part is tools like AI are actually really helpful in preparing for negotiation. They can get you 80% of the way there. But then you're right. You get into the negotiation, all of a sudden, something you thought they were interested in, they're immediately giving a concession on. Or you give a concession and they immediately ask for more, which is a very common thing to do, right? Especially if they're thinking win-lose in that process. So I think that what I've learned through all of this is that the reality is you are going to deal with the curveball. You are going to get something thrown at you. And at the end of the day, you have to think about, like, where am I trying to go? What do I value about in this relationship? Is this a one-off thing, or am I going to see this person again and again? What do I want? How do I want to, see myself at the end of the day when I look in the mirror? What am I willing to compromise on, and what am I not willing to compromise on? And trying to think through these various things. And ultimately, do I believe, and maybe it's overused at times, but do I believe that the pie can expand? Do I believe that, a win-win is truly out there? And if there's not a win-win, then let's do a no deal. This book, I think, kind of has an interesting, if I could tell you a little bit of the backstory, the negotiation that went into this book, it's kind of wild in retrospect. So I'll tell the listeners this. I don't usually tell this story, so let's just keep it among ourselves. But so he comes to my class. Patterson does. He speaks that day. After it was over, I said, I had built a little rapport with him, prepping him for class and talking about it afterwards. I thought, this is really fascinating. I want to study this disruption thing. So I'm going to ask him if he wants to partner write a book. He writes books. I've written a couple books. Let's see if we can do something together, right? So I write him this note. It is the worst sales pitch you've ever heard. It basically says, hey, Jim, I like you. You like me. Let's write a book together. Right? No response, right? No response at all, which I didn't deserve a response, quite frankly. So after about 10 days, I was like, all right, come on, step back. You teach negotiation. What are his interests? Where might our interests overlap? Blah, 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 blah. So I come back and I say, well, here's what I think could be done if we write a book in this space. You haven't written in this space before. I've been around people who have. Here's some things. Blah, blah. I make an argument. And then he says, okay, let's give it a shot. Work on an outline. So I was smart enough when he said, like, you work on it and we'll get together. I said, okay, what does that mean? What if I bring an outline to you and you don't like it? And he said, we're collaborating. We'll figure our way through this thing. I said, okay. So I bring him the first outline. He hated it. He hated it. He was like, this is blah, blah, blah. It was one of those calls where he's like, this is not very good. And I got to go. I got to call Bill Clinton. Click. And I was like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do now? Yeah. So then about 2 weeks later, I come back with another outline. And this is just me, talk about poor negotiating skills. This is me guessing at what I think he's going to want in this outline, including the first chapter that I write that I hope never has light of day again. Because it was me trying to write a James Patterson type of thriller thing, or I don't know what I was doing. So I throw that by him. And at that point, I think he's like, dude, you can't even write. It's like that thing was going. So I was like, okay, I got strike two. I got one more shot at getting the outline to him. So then I started thinking about this, where, another level of negotiation. I started thinking, like, okay, who would like to see me, a professor at Vanderbilt, write a book with James Patterson, an alumni of Vanderbilt University? Well, the chancellor would. I thought the chancellor would probably benefit from that, or see it valuable. I don't know if he benefits, but see value in that. So I make an appointment to go see our chancellor. And if chancellor's like the president, he is the president of the university, Chancellor Diermeyer. He's the top person at the university. For the most part, as a professor, you kind of don't go out of your way to see the chancellor. You say hello to him, but you just do your thing. And so I make an appointment to see him, and I walk into the chancellor, and I'd done a little bit of back envelope math on this, thinking this through, like what would matter to him and what do I need? And very much like you think about negotiation. And I walk in and I say to Chancellor Diermeyer, I have a 15% chance of writing a book with James Patterson. If you give me what I'm going to ask you for, it's going to immediately go to 50%. And if I do what I promise you I'm going to do, it'll go up 2 to 3% every month. He said, what do you need?
Wow.
I said, I need a research team. I need this. I need that. We talked about it for a while, and he said, you got it. So off I go. And if you take 2 to 3% and average that out, That's 20 more months. 2.5 times 20 gets you 50. So 50 plus the 50 he gave me is 100. 20 months after that meeting, we sold it to the publisher. Now that's that. Now is that luck? Yeah. There's a lot of luck in there, but it's also just taking the time to do the homework and think it through a little bit. Instead of like initially, I think when I was trying to reach out to Jim Patterson, my emotions probably had the best of me. I was excited about it, and just the possibility, even just saying like I had a potential of writing a book with him felt like a win. So you fast forward the next 20 months, we're working on this book project. So now we're about 3 years into this thing because I worked about 9 months before I went and saw the chancellor. So now we're about 3 years into this or more. And Patterson says to me, he says, I think we're ready to go see the publisher, right? Put together a 15-minute pitch that we could take to the publisher. I said, great. I said, okay, so we get on a Zoom call and I'm practicing the pitch with James Patterson. So it's me and him. And I said, okay, who are you? Who are you in this role play? And he's like, just give me the pitch. Like, he's a great guy. He goes, just give me the pitch. So I give him the pitch. And when it's over with, he goes, that was awesome. That's what we need. We got it. Let's set the appointment. And I said, great. I said, hey, Jim, we have never, ever talked about compensation or anything like that. How do you typically split deals like this? And he said to me, what do you think is fair? And I said, 50-50. And he said, that's what we'll do, 50-50. So I don't know if his deals are normally 50-50 or not, but I think there's a lot in that situation. I just felt like every step along the way was a win enough for me to stay in the game and just to be able to learn and work with him. I've learned so much about writing and media and so much from working with him that at the end of the day, I just felt confident saying, I think I brought this value to the table. Let's go this way. And he's such a genuinely good person. He's like, absolutely. So that was a lot of negotiation in that whole process.
Yes. Oh my goodness. You know that feeling when you're in back-to-back meetings all day? You're nodding along, trying to contribute, but in the back of your mind, you're secretly stressed because you're trying to remember exactly what was just said or who was supposed to follow up on what. Meetings can be a mess, but Granola AI fixes that. Granola is an AI-powered notepad built for the way real people actually meet. Here's how it works. You take rough notes like you normally would, and then in the background, Granola securely transcribes the meeting. Then it turns everything into clean, structured, and actually useful notes the moment the meeting ends. The best part? It works through your device's audio, so it integrates seamlessly into the tools that you already use. No setup and no awkward tools. It's just your normal meeting, but with superpowers. I've found that it lets me actually listen instead of frantically typing, so I walk away knowing exactly what was decided and what comes next. Before Granola, our team would spend extra time cleaning up notes and double-checking details. Now, we leave meetings aligned and clear. It saved us time and helps us to operate at a much higher level. If meetings are eating up your day, Granola.ai is a no-brainer. And you can try it totally free for 3 months. Just head to granola.ai/Kwame. That's granola.ai/Kwame to get your time back. Get 3 months free at granola.ai/Kwame. We talk a lot on this show about the importance of learning and staying sharp. But let's be honest, between work and life, who actually has time to read every single book that can help you to get ahead? And that is exactly why I use Blinkist. It's an app that takes the world's best nonfiction books and breaks them down into 15-minute summaries that you can read or listen to. They have over 9,000 titles, so whether you're into leadership, psychology, or negotiation, they've got you covered. Personally, I love to learn about a wide variety of topics, not just negotiation, but psychology, history, and communication. All of that knowledge works together to help me to be the negotiator that I am today. If you've been meaning to dive into the frameworks we discuss here every week, Blinkist is the fastest way to get those core insights while you're driving to work or at the gym. It turns your extra time into a real advantage, helping you to show up to every difficult conversation with more clarity and courage. If you want to start learning faster and showing up with more confidence, this is the tool for you. Go to Blinkist.com/Kwame to start your free trial. That's Blinkist.com/Kwame. Patrick, thank you. That story was delicious. That was great. And now we know behind the scenes what's it like to negotiate with James Patterson. So thank you for that. And one of the things that I love about this, and I love when negotiation experts are humble enough and confident enough in themselves to admit when they've made a mistake. Because I tell people all the time, if you ask a negotiation expert to tell you about a failure and they can't think of one, then you're not talking to a negotiation expert. This is a fraud. We all struggle, and I think it's really important to let folks in behind the scenes and say, hey, listen, sometimes our emotions get the best of us too,
Oh
and
yeah.
we miss, but the big part is, though, you can recover. That's the
That's
thing.
I think that's the key to it. It's the ability to, and not that I'm perfect at this, I try to get better at all the time, but I think what makes you better and better at something is you go, okay, A, I'm going to learn from this thing, and B, I'm not going to hang on to that. Like
Yes.
we actually, my wife teaches negotiation at Vanderbilt too. So
I
we
didn't
got two
know that.
Yeah, she currently, I'm gone right now from the university. She runs the negotiation for undergraduate. So she teaches it, and then that's all she teaches. And then she has professors who report to her who teach it. So she runs negotiation there. And she and I went and we bought a car the other day, and we are a one car family because we live right here in the city, and neither one of us are really into cars, but we did our homework and thinking it through. And I think the guy was surprised when he came back and he said, here's what I'll give you for your car. Both of us were like, we did our homework. That's a fair number. Okay. And it was like, in that moment, it's like, you're solving for fair. And that was a reasonable thing. And so it doesn't mean you put the screws to somebody all the time. Sometimes it's like, you know what? I'm going to walk away. I feel like we both got a good deal out of this. That's a win-win to me.
Yes, thank you. Because that's a question that I get on the road a lot, that annoys me. How do we know if we got a good deal? It's like, first of all, the person's not going to like show their bank statements and say you could have gotten this much more. That's just not realistic. No. And then also, did it work for you? Did it work for them? Then it's good. The goal isn't to
Yeah.
try to extract as much monetary value from the other side. It's to get a good deal.
When
Um,
we had our business, my wife and I had our business, we were, so we went at it for 11 years. We had offices in a few different cities. We had a great team of people, all that, I mean, wonderful stuff. And I was on a project that took me out of the country for 3 months, and she came with me as well as our son. Our daughter was in college at the time. And she came with, my wife and son came with me. So we were gone for 3 months. We come back right around the Christmas holiday, winter holiday timeframe. And my former boss from KPMG was talking to me on the phone, and I'm a big advocate of trying to like maintain relationships with people. And, so he's a friend of mine. So I'm talking to him and he said, wait a minute, you've been gone for 3 months. And I'm like, yeah. And he goes, and your clients haven't quit? I said, not that I know of. And he said, your employees haven't quit? I said, no. He said, you should talk to my boss because we're looking to acquire a company. So we ended up selling to that company. Right. And I wasn't looking to sell. And it was about 5 or 6 months of attorneys and accountants and going back and forth and trying to do diligence, all that type of stuff. And one day, my wife Jamie and I were talking about it. I remember exactly where we were at. It was in the evening. I called up the guy who was going to buy the company. And I hadn't really been talking to him that much. We've been talking through other people to him. And we called him up on this phone call. And we said, listen, we've been going at this like 4 or 5 months. Um, our attorney thinks we should get this. Our accountant feels like we should do this. I know you probably have your people saying the same thing. What do you think's fair? What do you think's reasonable? And he put out a number and we countered with a different number. And on that phone call in 10 minutes, we settled on how we're going to execute the sale of that business. And I don't fault anybody else that we were paying. They were all doing the thing that they needed to do. And they probably helped me get more value out of it and maybe a better deal for him as well. But at the end of the day, I fast forward like 4 or 5 years after we sold the business. I had to do a couple meetings in DC, and this office that he was in our DC office. And I called him up. I said, hey, I got to do a couple meetings with some clients. Any chance we could use some space in your office? He's like, absolutely no problem. So the fact that, you can call somebody up you sell a business to, and 4 years later, they're still talking to you, that's a win in a negotiation to me too. So
yeah.
yeah, it's not, there's a lot more involved in the negotiation than just dollars.
Yes.
And the more things you can figure out that matter in the negotiation, the more things you have to negotiate on,
Mhm.
the better it is.
Absolutely. The more paths to victory you have, the more likely you are to achieve a victory.
Yep.
And the more time you take to expand the pie, figure out what matters to them, share what matters to you, now we can be a lot more creative. And I want to dig in on this because you are using the F word here, and a lot of negotiation experts are afraid of saying fair because it triggers different biases. There's so much emotion behind it. But you've shown us twice in exceptionally high level deals where the word fair actually was the catalyst to getting the deal done. So let's talk about that word because it can be very heavy, especially in negotiations where one side is saying this is fair versus this is unfair. And now it can kind of become a little bit messy and squishy sometimes.
Well, fairness is a really useful term in negotiation because then oftentimes we have built-in sense of what fairness is, and we for whatever reason, we as human beings like fairness. We feel like things should be fair. So sometimes you can use that and exploit in situations like, this doesn't feel fair. I feel like I'm being treated unfairly. Things like that can be, you can use it as a tool in negotiation. I've done that as well at times. But I'm talking about kind of a higher level of fairness in regard to, does this seem like a reasonable outcome? I had this guy. I wouldn't necessarily claim that he was a mentor of mine, although I certainly listened to a lot of what he had said. I just suggest a mentor might suggest that he signed up for that relationship too. But this guy named Joel Peterson, he recently passed away, sadly, but
Mm.
he was the chairman of JetBlue's board. He was a professor at Stanford. He had a couple $1 billion commercial investment fund. And I was very fortunate to meet him because I met him through somebody else. And then actually spoke in my negotiation class for a number of years. He would join us virtually and speak from Stanford to my students. And he talked about this idea that one of his mantras in life is, I want to negotiate for fair. And he had like 300 businesses that he bought and sold over time. I mean, just billions of dollars coming in and coming out. And at the end of the day, so he kind of planted that seed in my mind that everything's not about extracting value from a numeric perspective or a dollar perspective. Sometimes the best thing to do is, I know I'm going to run into this person time and time again. So let's figure out what's the best deal for them. And sometimes, the money really matters to somebody else. Maybe you're in a position where you have a little bit more flexibility. At the end of the day, you might sleep a little bit better. So I feel pretty good about the deals I strike. And now I have some really smart people around me who help me strike better deals.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel pretty good about the deals I strike. But at the end of the day, you got to sleep with it too.
I 100% agree, Patrick. And I think a lot of times, again, we get so focused on one determination or one way of determining value, and that's money. And I think it's we had Morgan Housel, the author of the Psychology of Money, on the podcast, and he said, I think one of the reasons why people fixate on money is that it's such an easy way for us to keep score,
Yeah, you can quantify it real easy. Yeah.
quantify it. But when you start to take the time to quantify the unquantifiable, you realize that there's so much more value that we have at our fingertips. Because, like you said, you did a business deal with somebody, you sold your company, and now you could call them up and just borrow some office space. That means that you have a truly good relationship. The value in the relationship is often overlooked and underappreciated. And when we think about the word fair and we think about the value of the relationship, we need to circle back to the fact that your wife is a negotiation professor too. So
Yeah.
we need to explore this. Okay. So how do your tough conversations happen? Do you notice a difference in talking to her versus other people, or do you both get emotional and lose your skills? How does
No,
it
I
go?
no, actually it's not particularly hard to negotiate with each other. First of all, we're not neither one of us is trying to manipulate the other, to the best of my knowledge. Maybe she's manipulating the heck out of me, and I have no idea. But so it's not. I'm not. Neither one of us are coming from that perspective. We've been together so long, and our values are so aligned, and what we're trying to achieve together in life is pretty so clear that it makes it easy when you go to make a decision. If the person comes in, she comes to me and says, I'd like to do this or I'd like to do that. We might negotiate around the edges, but ultimately we want to support each other to do certain things. So I think it is genuinely a win-win. I'm a better human being because she's in my life, and I hope I'm doing the same for her. And if I am, then I'm not, the small things are the small things. Don't get caught up in the thick of thin things.
Ooh, I like that. I like that. And essentially, I'm going to extrapolate this because what it sounds like is that values alignment is important. Skills are important. So, for everybody out there listening to the podcast, if you have a significant other, get them to listen to the podcast too, and your relationship will
Yeah.
get better.
Well, and it sounds like I'm enlightened on this, but I had to pay the price the hard way.
Mm.
I had the business trip. I came home from one time, and she was in the garage saying, we need to talk about our relationship. And it was like, a year of not good stuff and a lot of stuff that I had caused, and our relationship had gotten to the brink, as you would say.
Mhm.
But I saw what I did to cause that to happen, and I think she did as well, and we figured our way back to a different path together. So when you put that in place, all of a sudden it's like, well, I'm going to weigh, this argument over this particular thing to try to win the negotiation isn't worth it compared to the
Right.
pain that we went through together in the past. So from that perspective, it allows you to go, you know what? am I trying to be right here, or am I trying to figure out the right answer together? And we're aligned, so it makes it a lot easier. We weren't then, we are now.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And we have now arrived at the point where we want to bring in Simone because I know I see him lying in wait, leaning
Uh-oh.
forward, eager for this question.
First, I want to share experience with you that I think is funny because I've worked with Kwame for 7 years now, but I learned to negotiate with him, and we have negotiated tons of times. The thing is that I use his framework because this is what I learned. So when I negotiate with him, we use exactly the same techniques, and it's curious because it's like this meme of Spider-Man, when Spider-Man is looking at each other and it's like a mirror.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it is.
Yeah, my wife and I live in the multiverse when we're negotiating with each other. Like, I know what you're doing to me. Let me see your worksheet.
And then I will ask for a personal advice because I know that to disrupt everything, you need to be courageous. And I have my particular way of seeing life and negotiation, and sometimes I am afraid to share that with the world, because sometimes I say no, it's so different from what I listen from everyone. So, to what extent should I feel comfortable on sharing my ideas, or how can I design a path that makes me feel safe to do it?
What are you fearful of?
Because it's too different from what I hear from the big speakers. Like I was born and lived in South America. It's a very different context from North America. So people are very different and the conflicts are very different. So, for instance, Kwame is like my superstar, but the way I see the world is different. Because I had a very rough reality there that Kwame knows because he lived in South America. But if I am going to tell what I feel or how I see negotiation, is very different from maybe the Harvard method or Kwame's method, and I am afraid because I haven't seen anyone saying something like that.
Yeah, so a couple of thoughts I have on this. One is you do have a unique perspective or a unique voice, and you should own it. And you're at the table, so share the ideas with other people. Um, and sometimes we don't know what we don't know until somebody else shows it to us. There's an expression that fish discover water last. So, we're swimming in a certain water and you've been swimming in a different water. And sometimes you can come over and show us things that we didn't even realize were there. And some of these things might be culturally unique that we might say, okay, that's interesting, but I don't know how I can apply it here. Other things might be just human and universal, and you're tapping into it in a different way. And at the end of the day, a negotiation is, one human or multiple humans working with other humans, at least at the moment, although AI is doing more and more of our negotiating for us. But so I would say, own your voice and bring it to the table. And if you share it and it doesn't land really well, that's fine. If you share it and it lands really well, that's fine too. It is what it is. And the question is, what do you do with it next? So I would say, Kwame's smart enough to bring you around because you're a smart guy. And he probably likes to hear what you have on your mind, and other people do as well. I mean, you left me curious going, gosh, I wonder what he would share that my students would pick up on that I'm not smart enough to bring into the classroom. And I hope, surround yourself by people like that. So own it. Yeah, do it. And, at the end of the day, if the intent of you sharing it is to help other people be better at what they're doing, you owe it to them to at least try.
Ooh, there it is. Straight to the heart, Simone. So now you have no more excuses. So we want to hear all of it. And then also, the Chris Voss could have said the same thing. He's like, well, nobody else is negotiating hostages, so maybe I'll just keep my stories to myself.
Yeah.
Everybody's got a different perspective. And I think most of the people reading Never Split the Difference aren't going to be like, you know what, I'm going to save some hostages today. Probably not, but they can apply it to their context. So
Exactly.
it's so
Exactly.
powerful. Patrick, this, my friend, has been exceptional. Thank you so much for making time for us. And then the other thing I want to say is that I feel like you have provided us with insights that have let people in our audience live their great life. I just came up with that. I don't know if you ever
I
heard
love it.
anything like that, but I
Love
just
it.
made that up. But seriously, jokes aside, I really appreciate it. Before you go, I want you to give one last shout out for the book, but also tell them about the fun things that you're doing with Franklin Covey and the course and everything else, and your website too.
Yeah. Thanks for asking me. So yeah, the book's available everywhere. You can walk through a mall, you'll pick it up, or if they even have bookstores, or online or local. Actually, go to a local store, buy it from a small store is always great. But just pick up a copy of the book if you're interested. You can go to my website's patrickleddin.com, or you can go to disrupteverything.com. It's the same website. One thing we'd love for people to do is we have a community page on there where we're trying to encourage people to share their stories so that other people are willing to step up and share their stories and maybe take a risk or do something. I think we can encourage each other to be positive disruptors. We need more positive disruption for good in this world. And then as far as the Franklin Covey goes, we were very fortunate. I've had a long-term relationship with them, and Jim Patterson could call anybody and say, I want to take my book, and you guys turn it into a course or a workshop, and they probably would at least take the call. But I said to him, I know these people at Franklin Covey, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People is all about how to build really good habits. They're about behavior change. I think what we have could be helpful to them. And they built a course called Disrupt Everything, Innovate for Impact. And the only thing I'd say at the end is that we call the book Disrupt Everything, but notice we don't call it Change Everything. And there's a reason behind that, because sometimes the most disruptive thing you can do is say no to change. And we wanted to give people you talked earlier about agency or choice, the ability to make a choice. Sometimes you might say, okay, there's this new piece of technology. We're going to embrace that and we're going to have some change. Other times you might say there's a new piece of technology, but if we go after that, we're going to lose track of what we're already doing, or we've already done 3 pieces of technology, or we're going to forget who we are or whatever. I'm going to say no to that. And sometimes saying no to a disruption when everybody else is chasing that change can be the most disruptive thing you're going to do. So what we want people to realize is sometimes you chase change and we call you a trailblazer or a torchbearer. And sometimes you say no and you chase stability. We call that a firefighter and a fire chief. And those are all important roles to take on at different times.
Amazing. Patrick, thank you so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate
Yeah, my
it.
pleasure. Thanks for having me.